Hi friends, today I'm going to be talking about teaching students with ADHD in the classroom. Throughout this presentation I will discuss the who's and whys of students with ADHD or Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder and how we as educators can make a difference in their education and lives. So let's start with explaining a little bit about the disorder. When you hear ADHD, what is it you think of? Possibly a kid who cannot sit still for very long and perhaps is all over the place, bouncing around like they just drank liquid sugar? There's so much more to ADHD than just the hyperactivity part of it. So what exactly is it? In a technical, broad symptom sense, inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity are the core symptoms of ADHD. When a child exhibits behaviors associated with ADHD, consequences may include difficulties with academics and with forming relationships with his or her peers if appropriate instructional methodologies and interventions are not implemented. Who does ADHD affect? According to a national 2016 parent survey that the CDC reported on, the estimated number of children ages 2 to 17 years ever diagnosed with ADHD is approximately 6.1 million, or 9.4%. And throughout the studies, it has also been proven that if you have ADHD as a child, it will carry over into adulthood. The symptoms just kind of shift around and look a bit different. Now, there are 3 different ways in which ADHD presents itself. You have the predominantly inattentive presentation, the predominantly hyperactive impulsive presentation, and a combined presentation. Let's take a closer look. So a predominantly inattentive presentation is just inattention without hyperactivity. Some of those symptoms include being easily distracted, trouble following through with tasks, shy or withdrawn behavior. Children with predominantly inattentive presentation are typically seen as lazy, standoffish, or like they have their heads in the clouds. The predominantly hyperactive impulsive presentation is hyperactivity without the inattention. Some of those symptoms could be overactive, difficulty waiting turns, excessive talking, loud interactions with others. Now, unfortunately, children with predominantly hyperactive impulsive presentation are seen as fidgety, restless, and even aggressive. And then you have the combined presentation, which is just that, an equal combination of the previous 2 types. So why is it important to understand? Well, because of the nature of the main symptoms, students with ADHD are often confused as being lazy, emotional, rude, and more. And that is why it's so important for us as teachers to know and understand ADHD, so that way we can identify the disorder and inform the proper people to begin implementing the appropriate accommodations or procedures to help that child succeed through school and into adulthood. All too often, adults see children with ADHD as just kids who need to be whipped into shape. But there's no amount of punishment that can resolve the inattentive and hyperactive symptoms caused by ADHD. The student needs the proper care, love, patience, and understanding as any other child with or without a disability in order to succeed throughout childhood and into adolescence and then function as an adult. Once you understand how ADHD affects the child's behaviors and strengths, you can then focus on understanding how to help them. As educators, we are responsible to be one of the child's educational, emotional, and behavioral support and work alongside their support team. Well, that seems like a lot for someone who just has trouble concentrating, right? Well, students with ADHD are often not just students with ADHD. There are many designations that are associated with ADHD that puts us in a position of support on multiple levels. Let's take a look at some of these. Oftentimes, children with ADHD have other disorders as well as ADHD, such as behavior conduct problems, learning disorders, anxiety and depression, peer problems, even increased injuries. And the combination of ADHD with other disorders often presents extra challenges for children, parents, and educators. Now, once we can understand how ADHD affects the student, we can understand how to help the child manage their symptoms, structure their lives, emotions, and behaviors in and out of the classroom. And once we can understand how to help the child manage, then we are one step closer to helping that child perform better academically, helping them feel wanted, loved, and even a part of their peer group. There's a very good possibility that one of us may be a child's biggest advocate for the appropriate accommodations, services, and education to help that child succeed. We just need to recognize and appreciate the differences that these children bring to our classrooms and our lives. So there are 2 laws or acts that I want to talk about that bring about 2 of the most beneficial educational programs for children with ADHD. The first is the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, or rather, Section 504 of this act. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973 was the first disability civil rights law to be enacted in the United States. Section 504 of this law set the stage for the enactment of the Americans with Disabilities Act and gives children important rights in public and private schools and beyond. Section 504 serves two main purposes. First, it requires school districts to provide free, appropriate public education, or FAPE, to students who have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, or have a record of such an impairment, or can be regarded as having such an impairment. It's important to note two things. One, unlike the next law I'll discuss, Section 504 has a broad definition of disability. And two, under Section 504, appropriate means providing supports to give a child access to the same education their peers are getting. The second purpose of Section 504 prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in programs and activities that get federal funding, which applies to all K-12 public schools and most private schools and colleges. So as long as they receive federal funding, which most do. And covered under these federally funded programs is the right to reasonable accommodations, which we'll cover a little more in just a moment. The second law I want to discuss is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. IDEA was enacted in 1975, 2 years after Section 504, under the original name Education of Handicapped Children Act, but was later changed in 1990, and with the name change they added traumatic brain injury and autism as new disability categories. So what exactly is IDEA? IDEA is the nation's special education law. It gives rights and protections to kids with disabilities. It covers them from birth through high school graduation, or age 21, whichever comes first. And parents and legal guardians have rights under this law as well. What does it do? Well, IDEA places two big responsibilities on states and their public schools. FAPE, or the Free and Appropriate Public Education, and schools have to give parents a voice in their child's education. Now, under IDEA, appropriate means providing special education services to meet a child's unique needs. Another important part of this to keep in mind is that these kids must learn side by side with the peers as much as possible in something called the least restrictive environment, or LRE. Basically, LRE means kids who receive special education services should be in the same classrooms as other kids as much as possible. And though ADHD is not considered to be a learning disability, it can still be determined to be a disability with IDEA under other health impairment, making a student eligible to receive special education services through IDEA. IDEA ensures that all children with disabilities are entitled to have their unique needs met and to prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. But who all is eligible? Not every child is eligible for special education under IDEA, and having a diagnosis doesn't guarantee eligibility. To qualify, kids must have a disability that falls under one of the 13 categories IDEA covers. Those are listed below. You can see that other health impairment is where ADHD would be covered under. However, having one of these disabilities doesn't automatically qualify a child under IDEA. To be eligible, a student must have a disability and, as a result of that disability, needs special education to make progress in school. For example, if a student has ADHD and is doing well in school, the student might not be covered by IDEA. Now let's talk about how the education system uses Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act and IDEA to implement policies and accommodations for students. Now there is a lot of information that pertains to these plans, so this is a brief rundown of what the plans are and what they do for students with disabilities, specifically ADHD. The first one I want to talk about is 504 plan. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act gives us what's called a 504 plan, which is basically just a blueprint or plan for how the school provides support and remove barriers for a student with a disability. This support and services are changes to the learning environment itself to enable students to learn alongside their peers. In order to obtain a 504 plan, there are two requirements. The first one is that the child has any disability, and the second is that the disability must interfere with the child's ability to learn in a general education classroom. Section 504 covers a wide range of different struggles in school and has a broader definition of the word disability than IDEA. Basically, according to Section 504, a disability must substantially limit one or more basic life activities, including learning, reading, communicating, and thinking. Now, what's in it? Well, a 504 plan is not a special education program. A 504 plan generally includes specific accommodations, supports, or services for a child, the names of who will provide each service, and the name of the person responsible for ensuring the plan is implemented. Accommodations are just changes to the learning environment or material that give students equal access. We'll go over those a little more in the sample 504. So looking at this, you can see that at the top of the page, that's going to be all the students' information. Just under that, you will see the diagnosis or the impairment. This kid has ADHD. Certificate of Plan of Distribution, that's going to be the 504 coordinator, the person who is responsible for making sure this plan is implemented. A little bit lower from under there, you can see the accommodations, and you have the accommodations lists, like preferential seating, note-taking taking assistance, frequent breaks, chunking of assignments, and you can see just to the right of that, the method of implementations if necessary. On the second page here, on the top, you can see they have state test accommodations. So for the STAR and all the accommodations that they have for those. Now this child doesn't have any of the other stuff, but a 504 plan also covers ADA, effective communication, service animals, whether there's a behavior plan or not, looks like food substitutions, dyslexia services. So, there's even a statement of the least restrictive environment there. And on the last page, you can see the plan implementation, when and for how long the plan will be implemented, as well as additional notes. And under the additional notes, you can see that the parent had a part in this, and that at any time they can revise the plan, hold a meeting and revise the plan. Now we're going to take a look at Individualized Education Programs, or IEPs for short. Again, there's a lot to unpack about IEPs, so this is just a brief rundown of the program. With that said, IDEA gives us what's called an IEP. An IEP is a blueprint or plan for a child's special education experience at school that provides individualized special education and related services to meet a child's unique needs. This is a special education program for students with disabilities, and students with ADHD can qualify for services, but it's pretty strict. In order to obtain special education services through an IEP, there are two requirements. The first is that the child has one or more of the 13 disabilities listed in IDEA, and the second is that the disability must affect the child's educational performance and/or ability to learn and benefit from a general education curriculum. The law does list specific challenges like learning disabilities, ADHD, autism, for which the child must need specialized instruction to make progress in school. So what's in an IEP? The IEP sets learning goals and describes the services the school will provide in a written document. There is required information that each IEP must include. Feel free to pause the video and take a look at this list here, but we're going to go over a sample IEP or what's inside of them. So this here is a bare bones anatomy of an IEP. On the first page here you have the student information, and then underneath that you have the IEP team. This is the whole team that is working with that one student to make sure that this plan is put into place. On the next page there you can see the present level of educational performance, which describes the child's current abilities, skills, challenges, and strengths, and may also discuss social skills and behavior. Just after that, on the next page you can see the annual goals, and it has the goals as well as the objectives that lead up to the goals. The objectives are kind of like a stepping stone. Underneath that you have the progress reporting, and this basically states how the IEP team will keep track of and report the progress. On the next page you have the services that are provided through this IEP, as well as supplementary aid and services. That supplementary aid is basically like the 504. It's accommodations and modifications to the classroom for the student to be in the general ed classroom. Then you have the participation, which goes in a little bit more detail about the how the student will be included in general education classroom, and then the consent for the parent or guardian. Now the parent or guardian can consent to all of it, none of it, some of it, or they can add an addendum and change it up a little bit if they want to. The 3 R's. So once you understand who ADHD affects, you can form the necessary relationships which are key to reaching these students and gaining their trust so that they can assure that you are on their side and only wanting to make school life easier for them. Once you understand how ADHD affects these kids, you can then adjust your curriculum to make the lessons relevant to the students and help them to see that they are a part of the class, and these lessons do connect them with their peers. And once you can understand what ways to help these students and in what ways they benefit from these programs and laws, you can then watch them grow as students and watch the rigor within them grow as well. After all, children with ADHD, whether working with accommodations in the gen ed classroom or working with an IEP team in SPED, are no different than a typically developing children in our classrooms. You have to adjust your teaching to help any of these children grasp the concepts to apply them to their lives. Some need a little more work than others. But I did read this quote online from a woman named Judith Tack Lanier, and it was in an article she wrote called Redefining the Role of a Teacher. And she states, the day-to-day job of a teacher is becoming one of designing and guiding students through engaging learning opportunities. An educator's most important responsibility is to search out and construct meaningful educational experiences that allow students to solve real-world problems and show that they have learned the big ideas, powerful skills, and habits of mind and heart that meet agreed-on educational standards. Now, this was written in 1997 about the role of a teacher, and it still holds strong these days when thinking about what our jobs as educators is. Also, in reading that quote, you can apply it to all students inside and outside of your classrooms. Thank you.